I don't know how it happened, but I'm standing in this courtroom, trembling as the judge prepares to pronounce the verdict. The room feels suffocating. I glance over at my mother, who is sitting beside me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face a mask of stoic pain. She's been fighting this battle for so long, fighting for my brother, fighting for justice, and here we are, at the final moment. The tension in the air is palpable. I wish my brother could have been here to see this. Jamie was everything to me. He was my protector, my best friend, my rock. It was supposed to be a normal night. We were both in the car that night. He was driving us home after a long study session. We were almost home when everything changed. A car ran the red light, slamming into us with such force that I can still feel the impact reverberating through my body. The screech of tires, the crash, and then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My body ached all over, and my heart felt like it was being crushed. Jamie was gone, and the world, our world, was shattered. The other driver, Nichols, didn't have a scratch on him, but my brother, he was gone. I spent weeks in a haze trying to make sense of it all, struggling to accept the truth. The police said it was an accident, but I couldn't believe it. Jamie was an excellent driver. He'd never been reckless. He wouldn't have caused the crash. But Eric, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Something was off. His family was wealthy, powerful. They could get away with anything. And that thought haunted me every single day. The trial began soon after. Eric's family hired the best lawyers money could buy, and the prosecutor, the one who was supposed to help us, seemed to have no interest in getting justice for my brother. I couldn't understand it. Why was no one fighting for Jamie? Why was no one listening to us? I remember the first time I saw Eric in the courtroom. He was sitting there smug, his family beside him, all dressed in their expensive suits. They had the kind of confidence that only comes with power. They knew they could win. They knew they could buy their way out of this. And I hated them for it. I hated how they made me feel so small, so helpless. But I wasn't going to give up. I couldn't. Not when Jamie had been taken from us. Not when the truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. And then just when I thought things couldn't get worse, something changed. A lawyer named Micha showed up. I'd seen him in the courtroom before, but he hadn't been involved in our case until now. Micha was different. He didn't come from money, but he had something that Eric's lawyers didn't have: integrity. Micha had been watching the case closely, and he knew something was wrong. He had proof that Eric's family had been paying off officials to cover up Eric's past. Micha showed up at our house one night with a stack of papers. He told my mother that Eric wasn't just a careless driver. He had a history that had been hidden from the court. 5 years ago, Eric had been involved in a fatal car accident in Oakland. He had killed a girl named Becca, and yet he had walked away with no consequences. How? Money. Money had protected him then, just like it was protecting him now. I was furious. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How had the system failed us so badly? How had Eric managed to escape justice once, and now he was doing it again? Micha didn't stop there. He'd hired a forensic accountant who had uncovered massive cash withdrawals from Eric's family's bank accounts, money that matched up with large payments to the DA, the same DA who was supposed to be helping us. Micha had found the receipts. He had the evidence, and he was going to bring it to light. The next day, Micha filed a motion to remove the DA from the case. We were all nervous, but Micha was determined. He was fighting for us, and we had to trust him. We had no other choice. The day the motion was heard in court was the day everything changed. Micha stood up in front of the judge, holding up the receipts, showing the bribes, showing how the system had been rigged. He was calm, collected, but I could see the fire in his eyes. He wasn't just fighting for Jamie anymore. He was fighting for every person who had ever been wronged by the system. And when Micha played the traffic camera footage showing Eric speeding before the crash, the courtroom went silent. Eric's defense lawyer tried to argue that the evidence wasn't valid, that it had been tampered with. But Micha wasn't backing down. The DA sat there, red-faced, unable to defend his actions. Micha had won. The judge looked at the evidence, and, for the first time in this trial, I felt a glimmer of hope. The judge ordered the removal of the DA, and Micha was appointed as the special prosecutor in our case. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. But the war was far from over. The battle in the courtroom was just beginning. Eric's family didn't give up easily. They tried everything to discredit us, to tear down the evidence, to make us look like we were the ones in the wrong. They had money, power, and influence, and they were willing to use it all to get their son off the hook. But Micha had us prepared. He had the evidence, he had the witnesses, and most importantly, he had the truth on his side. As the trial continued, the tension grew. Every day I felt like I was walking on a razor's edge, afraid of what might happen next. But I had something I didn't have before. Hope. Micha was determined, and so was I. The following week, the trial moved into its next phase. Micha was relentless. Every morning I found myself at the courthouse, sitting in the same uncomfortable seats, staring at the defense team across the room. Eric's father, Mr. Nichols, seemed unfazed by anything that was happening, but his smug smile never quite reached his eyes. He knew his money could buy him a way out, but Micha wasn't about to let that happen. Not on his watch. The courtroom had become our battlefield, and every day we were fighting for Jamie's name. It felt like the world was stacked against us. Eric's lawyers were sharp, ruthless, and every argument they presented made it harder to hold on to the small pieces of hope I had left. But Micha, he was different. He wasn't intimidated by them. "Micha, do you really think we have a chance?" I whispered to him one day, my voice breaking with exhaustion. The trial was taking its toll on me, and I could feel myself becoming more and more disheartened. "We don't have a choice, Mrs. Garcia," Micha replied, his voice low but steady. "Your son deserves justice. We'll make sure he gets it." I watched Micha as he stood before the judge, presenting the evidence. He was in his element, calm and composed, every piece of information meticulously laid out. The new footage, the receipts, the testimony from the forensic accountant, all of it was solid. But with the defense team's attacks and their manipulation of the press, it felt like a losing battle at times. On the second day of the new evidence presentation, Eric's lawyer attempted to discredit the footage by claiming it was doctored. The defense had its own expert witness to try to refute our claims, but Micha wasn't having it. He stood tall and confronted the witness with the unshakable certainty that only comes when you know you're right. "Isn't it true, sir," Micha began, "that the data presented to you was not the product of any tampering, but rather the exact footage taken directly from the traffic cameras?" He let the words hang in the air, as everyone in the courtroom held their breath. The witness hesitated, sweat forming on his brow. "Well, yes, but—" "No buts," Micha interrupted. "You can either stand by your testimony that the footage was doctored without evidence, or you can admit that your analysis was faulty from the beginning." There was a long pause. The defense attorney looked furious, but the expert witness stumbled over his words, eventually admitting that he had no proof of tampering. It was a small but significant victory, and I could feel the shift in the room. The tide was starting to turn. As the trial continued, my mother was becoming more fragile. I could see the toll this was taking on her. Every day she clung to the belief that Jamie's death would not be in vain. But when she saw Eric's parents sitting there, their faces blank with indifference, she would shake her head, unable to hide the fury behind her eyes. "Micha, you're our last hope," she whispered to him one evening as we walked out of the courthouse. "If you can't do this, then who will? The DA was bought. The cops are covering for them. We have no one else." Micha paused, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm not going to let them get away with it, Mrs. Garcia. I promise." And he kept that promise. The day the verdict was announced was the longest day of my life. I couldn't sit still in the courtroom. The air felt thick, heavy, as if every word from the judge could shatter everything we had fought for. Micha had been giving us updates throughout the day, but it was clear the jury was torn. Eric's lawyers had done everything they could to muddy the waters, to cast doubt on the evidence. The defense tried to portray my brother as reckless, as if he had caused the crash on purpose. But we knew the truth. Jamie wasn't reckless. Jamie was an angel, a careful driver who would never have put anyone's life in danger. But Eric? He had a history of dangerous driving, street racing, and reckless behavior. And yet his family's money had shielded him from every consequence. Not this time. Not anymore. The judge called for a recess, and I felt my stomach twist with anxiety. Micha walked over to us, his face unreadable. "We're getting close," he said, his voice steady. "But I can't promise anything. We've done everything we could, but now it's in the jury's hands." I nodded, my mind racing. This was it. This was our last chance to get justice for Jamie. I didn't care about the money or the power that Eric's family had. I cared about the truth. And if the jury saw the truth, they would have no choice but to convict him. The final hours of the trial felt like a blur. Every time the door to the courtroom opened, my heart skipped a beat, hoping it was the moment we had all been waiting for. My mother, who had been sitting quietly beside me, suddenly grabbed my hand, her fingers trembling. "Are they going to make us wait much longer?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I wanted to say something comforting, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was hold her hand tightly, knowing that we were in this together. Finally, the door opened. The jury had reached a verdict. We stood up as the bailiff called for order. I held my breath as the judge looked down at the paper in his hands. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Eric Nichols, guilty of vehicular manslaughter," the judge announced, his voice booming through the stillness of the room. A wave of relief washed over me, but it wasn't over yet. There was still the sentencing, still the fight for justice. But this was the victory we had fought for. I looked over at my mother, and tears welled up in my eyes. She was sobbing, tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in years, she looked like she could breathe again. The weight had been lifted. Jamie had been vindicated. Eric's family, who had been sitting confidently, their faces now drained of color, looked at each other in disbelief. It wasn't over for them. It would never be over. But for us, it was the beginning of healing. In the weeks that followed, there were media reports, public outcry, and plenty of whispers about how much money Eric's family had spent to try and get him acquitted. But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that Jamie had been given the justice he deserved. The court proceedings were behind us, but life, for me and my mother, would never be the same. We had been through hell, and we had come out the other side stronger and more determined to make sure that no one else would have to go through what we did. Micha came to visit us once the trial was officially over. "You did it," he said, looking at my mother with a proud smile. "You fought and you won. Jamie's name will never be forgotten." We had done it, and for once I allowed myself to believe in justice again. In the aftermath of the trial, the media buzzed with excitement over the unexpected outcome. The case of Eric Nichols had captured the public's attention, and the fact that he had been convicted despite his family's wealth and power was a rare and remarkable triumph for justice. It felt surreal to see the headlines, to hear people talk about the victory. But for me, it wasn't about the attention. It was about my brother's name being cleared, about the truth finally being acknowledged. We had won in court, but the fight wasn't over yet. There were still the personal battles to be faced, the healing that needed to take place. My mother, though relieved by the verdict, was not yet whole. The years of grief, of carrying the weight of Jamie's death, had taken their toll. I could see it in her eyes. The burden wasn't gone, but it was lighter now. "Micha," I said one evening, as we sat in the living room, "I don't know what we would have done without you. You've given us more than just legal help. You've given us hope." Micha smiled, his expression softening as he placed his hand over mine. "I did what anyone would have done. Jamie deserved justice, and so did you." I nodded, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just about justice. Micha had become more than just our lawyer. He had become a lifeline, someone who had believed in us when the world seemed to have abandoned us. And now, as the dust settled, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. But not everyone was celebrating. The Nichols family, of course, was furious. They had lost everything. Their son convicted for a crime they had worked so hard to cover up. I could feel the tension building as rumors swirled about possible appeals and further legal maneuvering. Eric's parents, wealthy and powerful as they were, would not take this lying down. Late one night, as I sat in the living room, thinking about the long road ahead, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Micha. Micha. We need to talk. Meet me at my office first thing tomorrow. I stared at the message for a moment, a sense of unease creeping into my chest. What else could possibly be coming our way? But I knew better than to doubt Micha. If he said we needed to meet, it was because something was happening, something important. The next morning I arrived at Micha's office, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. Micha was already there, pacing back and forth behind his desk, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Sit down," he said, his tone unusually serious. "We've got a problem." I took a seat, my heart pounding in my chest. "What's going on?" Micha turned to face me, his expression grim. "It's about the Nichols family. They've already started working on their appeal, but that's not all. I've uncovered something. Something that could change everything." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I've been digging into the case, as you know, and it turns out that there's more to the story than we thought. Eric's father, Mr. Nichols, has connections that go far beyond what we initially believed. There's someone in the local police department who may have helped cover up some of the details of the accident, and I'm not sure how deep this goes yet, but it's big." I felt my heart race. Are you saying they're going to try and make this go away?" "Again?" Micha nodded. "It's a possibility, but I don't think it's something they can just sweep under the rug. Not this time. We've got evidence that could destroy any chances they have at an appeal, but we need to move quickly." "Then what are we waiting for?" I asked, my voice suddenly filled with determination. "We fight back. We fight harder." Micha smiled, the corner of his mouth twitching in approval. "That's the spirit. But we need more. We need to expose everything, and we need to get ahead of them before they can silence us." The weight of what was at stake pressed heavily on me, but I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after everything we had been through. For the next few weeks, Micha and I worked tirelessly, sifting through documents, reviewing evidence, and meeting with trusted sources who could help us build a case against the Nichols family. The deeper we dug, the more disturbing the connections we found. There were payoffs, cover-ups, and even threats made to witnesses who had tried to speak out about the accident. But the most shocking discovery came when Micha uncovered evidence that one of the lead investigators in the original case had been bribed. The evidence was damning, an email chain that showed a clear exchange of money between the Nichols family and the investigator, offering him a bribe in exchange for manipulating the details of the report. The investigator had been paid to omit key pieces of evidence, including the fact that Eric had been speeding at the time of the crash. When Micha showed me the evidence, I could hardly believe what I was seeing. The corruption ran deeper than we had imagined, but now we had the proof we needed. "We're going to take them down," Micha said, his voice steady and filled with resolve. "But we need to act fast. Once this hits the press, there's no going back." The day the story broke was the day everything changed. Micha had worked with a journalist who had connections to a major news outlet, and the article detailing the corruption within the police department and the Nichols family hit the front page. The public outrage was immediate. People were furious, not just at Eric's actions, but at the lengths his family had gone to protect him. The support for Jamie's family grew exponentially, and the pressure on the court system to reopen the case became overwhelming. Within a week, the judge overseeing Eric's case issued a statement. The appeal had been rejected, and new charges were being brought against the Nichols family. The police officer involved in the cover-up was arrested, and several others were placed under investigation. Eric's world was crumbling, and there was nothing his family could do to stop it. When the news reached me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, mixed with relief. Jamie's name was being cleared, and the truth was finally out in the open. But even as Eric's world came crashing down, I knew our fight wasn't over. There would be more battles to face, more hurdles to overcome. But for the first time since Jamie's death, I felt like we had a fighting chance, and that was enough. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded it. Eric Nichols, once confident in his family's ability to buy his freedom, now sat in a cold, uncomfortable silence, knowing his fate was sealed. The charges against him were clear, the evidence irrefutable. And for the first time in his life, money couldn't buy his way out. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. Due to the overwhelming evidence presented, including the bribery of law enforcement officials and the manipulation of the case details, I hereby sentence Eric Nichols to the maximum penalty allowed under the law. I sat quietly, the weight of it all finally sinking in. Jamie was gone, and nothing could bring him back. But today, in this moment, his name was finally cleared. The pain that had haunted us for so long felt lighter, even if only for a moment. My mother beside me clutched my hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. "We finally got justice for Jamie." But as I looked around the courtroom, I knew that this victory wasn't just about us. It was about something much bigger. This was a reminder that justice could prevail, even in a world where wealth and influence often tip the scales in favor of the powerful. The Nichols family, for all their riches, had been brought to their knees. Their lies had been exposed, their empire crumbled. In the end, it wasn't money that had won the day, it was the truth. And the truth, no matter how buried it seemed, always found a way to surface. As the trial came to a close, the court dismissed the jury, and Eric was taken into custody. The media coverage was relentless. Headlines screamed about the corruption, the bribery, and the injustice that had been allowed to fester for so long. But amidst the storm of attention, there was a deeper truth. The fight for justice wasn't over. The real victory wasn't just in Eric's conviction. It was in showing that no matter how powerful someone was, the truth could always win out. We left the courtroom that day, our hearts heavy but filled with a sense of accomplishment. For the first time in years, I felt like we could breathe. Jamie's name was cleared, and the man who had taken his life would finally pay for his actions. As we walked out of the courthouse, I turned to Micha, who had been the key to our victory. "We couldn't have done this without you," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. Micha smiled, his eyes reflecting a quiet strength. "You did the hard work. I just helped you find the truth." As the final pieces of our journey fell into place, I reflected on everything we had been through. The grief, the betrayal, the seemingly insurmountable odds. It had all led to this moment, where truth triumphed over lies. But more than that, it reminded me of the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. Too often, we're told that money, influence, and power are the keys to getting ahead. But the real power lies in our ability to seek the truth, to stand firm in the face of adversity, and to fight for justice, no matter the cost. And as for Eric Nichols, his story was a cautionary tale for anyone who thought that wealth could protect them from the consequences of their actions. In the end, it was his arrogance, his belief that he was untouchable, that had sealed his fate. So what do you think? Did justice prevail? Do you believe the system can be changed? Or do powerful families still hold too much sway in our society? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever faced an injustice or fought for the truth, I want to hear your story. Let's continue the conversation about how we can all make a difference and hold those in power accountable. Thanks for listening, and remember, no matter how dark it may seem, the truth always finds a way to shine through. Keep fighting for what's right.